I was 17 years old. It was 2018, late October. A little after 9 p.m. outside. It was already dark, but not completely. Streetlights were on, and their light came through the windows in a dull, familiar way. My parents had gone to visit friends in a nearby town and weren't coming back until the next day. That wasn't unusual. It had happened before. I stayed home because I didn't feel like going with them. School had been exhausting that week, and I just wanted a quiet night to myself. I'd been exhausting that week, and I just wanted a quiet night to myself. I'd been alone overnight before, and nothing bad had ever happened. My phone was charged. The doors were locked. The neighborhood was calm and ordinary. There was no reason to worry. That night had ever happened. My phone was charged. The doors were locked. The neighborhood was calm and ordinary. There was no reason to worry. That night, I didn't have any real plans. I made some tea, opened my laptop, and mindlessly watched videos while replying to a few messages. It was the kind of evening you forget about the next day. Everything felt routine, predictable. I remember thinking how normal it all felt. Staying home alone for a night wasn't a big deal. Trusting the situation made sense. There was nothing reckless about it. It honestly felt like something that could happen to anyone. The first thing that didn't quite line up happened less than 15 minutes after my parents left. I didn't notice it right away, because I was doing what I always did when I had the place to myself. Moving around too casually, like the house belonged to me in a way it normally didn't. I turned off the hallway light to save electricity, left the kitchen light on because it made the living room feel less empty, and I carried my mug of tea back and forth because I kept forgetting where I put it. At around 9:25 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. Everything okay? I replied with a thumbs up and a dumb selfie where I looked half asleep. She responded with a laughing emoji and told me not to stay up too late. Normal. Completely normal. What wasn't normal was that, right after I sent my reply, I heard the softest sound from downstairs. It wasn't a bang or a crash. Nothing dramatic or wanted to stay up too late. Normal. Completely normal. What wasn't normal was that, right after I sent my reply, I heard the softest sound from downstairs. It wasn't a bang or a crash. Nothing dramatic. It was more like a dull single tap. The kind of sound you barely register because houses make noises all the time. Pipes tick. Wood shifts. A neighbor closes a car door and you feel it through the walls. I froze for maybe 2 seconds. Then I did what everyone does. I tried to explain it away before I even let myself feel anything. I told myself it was the fridge, or the heating, or the old cabinet door that never stayed completely shut and sometimes clicked open a fraction and settled again. I went back to my laptop. A couple minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was a longer noise, like something sliding lightly across a surface. It lasted maybe a second. I went back to my laptop. A couple minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was a longer noise, like something sliding lightly across a surface. It lasted maybe a second, then stopped. Again, not loud, just enough to make my attention snap toward the stairs without me meaning to. I sat there with my hands on the keyboard, waiting for a third sound, like my brain needed a pattern before it could decide whether to care. Nothing happened. I took a sip of tea that had already cooled a little and tried to focus on the video playing. I even turned the volume up just to drown out the house. That's when I noticed something else, and it was so small that I almost laughed at myself for even noticing. The front door chain wasn't latched. The main lock was. The deadbolt was. But the chain wasn't latched. The main lock was. The deadbolt was. But the chain, the one my parents always used when they were home, the one they would automatically slide into place without thinking, was hanging loose. I stared at it for a long moment, like it was a puzzle. Then I stepped closer and touched it with my fingertip. It swung slightly and clicked against the metal plate. The rational explanation came immediately. I stared at it for a long moment, like it was a puzzle. Then I stepped closer and touched it with my fingertip. It swung slightly and clicked against the metal plate. The rational explanation came immediately. My parents didn't use the chain when they left because you can't lock it from outside. That was it. That was the reason. I told myself again that it was normal. Wi-Fi glitches. The camera was cheap. The app was buggy. It happened. Still, I kept thinking about the voice, and the tap, and the chain on the door. None of it was scary on its own. It was more like a handful of tiny things that didn't fit together, and I couldn't figure out why I was trying to make them fit. I remember having a clear thought, plain and simple. I noticed it, but I decided not to think about it, so I didn't. I closed the camera app, went back to the couch, and tried to let the night stay ordinary. Around 10 o'clock, I decided to change what I was doing. Sitting still and scrolling was making me too aware of every little sound, so I switched the TV on. Not anything intense, just a familiar comedy I'd already seen a dozen times. something with canned laughter and predictable jokes. The effect was immediate. The room filled with voices that weren't mine, and the silence stopped feeling heavy. I leaned back on the couch, pulled a blanket over my legs, and let my silence stop feeling heavy. I leaned back on the couch, pulled a blanket over my legs, and let myself relax into it. I even smiled at one point. I remember that clearly. The tea was gone, so I stood up, went to the kitchen, and rinsed the mug. The house looked exactly the same as it always did. Same magnets on the fridge. So I stood up, went to the kitchen, and rinsed the mug. The house looked exactly the same as it always did. Same magnets on the fridge. Same scuff on the floor near the counter. Same hum from the appliances. Nothing out of place. I checked the locks again. Not because I was scared, but because that's what my parents always told me to do. Everything was secure. Deadbolt locked. Back door locked. Windows closed. It felt good to confirm it, like ticking items off a list. When I sat back down, I grabbed my phone and texted my friend that I was bored out of my mind. He replied with a joke about me surviving one whole night alone. I sent back a laughing emoji and told him I'd probably fall asleep on the couch. For a while, that felt true. The noises from earlier didn't repeat themselves. No tapping, no sliding sounds, no voices outside. The Wi-Fi stayed stable. The doorbell camera didn't send any more notifications. I stretched out, half watching the TV, half dozing, no stuff. No tapping, no sliding sounds, no voices outside. The Wi-Fi stayed stable. The doorbell camera didn't send any more notifications. I stretched out, half watching the TV, half dozing. My body felt loose, heavy in a comfortable way. The tension I hadn't realized I was holding finally drained out of my shoulders. I remember thinking that I'd let my imagination run ahead of me. Being alone had made me hyper-aware. That was all. When you expect quiet, every small thing feels louder than it should. At one point, I even felt embarrassed about how I'd stared at the door chain earlier, like it meant something. It didn't. It was just a detail my brain grabbed onto because it was looking for one. The clock on the cable box ticked over to 10:18 p.m. I told myself I'd stay up until the episode ended, then go to bed. I pictured brushing my teeth, locking my door, putting my phone on the charger. Normal steps. I'd stay up until the episode ended, then go to bed. I pictured brushing my teeth, locking my door, putting my phone on the charger. Normal steps. Normal night. For the first time since my parents left, I felt like I understood the situation again. Like I was in control of it. Alone, yes, but safely, predictably alone. I remember having one clear thought, almost reassuring. I've worse than stopped, sir. Stopped some Belfort Nove months. It happened while the laugh track was still playing. I didn't notice it at first because the sound didn't belong to the house. It didn't come from inside the walls or the floor or the ceiling. It came from somewhere much closer. My phone vibrated on the coffee table. I glanced at it without much interest, expecting a message. Instead, I saw a notification from the doorbell camera app. Live view started. That didn't make sense. The camera was rocking the doorbell camera app. Live view started. That didn't make sense. The camera only started live view if I opened it manually. Motion alerts were separate, and those sent recordings, not this. For a separate, and those sent recordings, not this. For a second, I thought maybe I'd brushed the screen by accident earlier and left it running, but the app wasn't even open. I picked up the phone. The live feed loaded instantly this time. No lag. No glitch. The porch light was still on. The concrete was still on. The feed loaded instantly this time. No lag. No glitch. The porch light was still on. The concrete was still wet. The frame was perfectly still. Then something moved at the very edge of the screen. Not stepping into view, just a shift. A shadow bending where it shouldn't have been able to bend. Like someone was standing just outside the camera's angle, close enough to affect the light. I waited for it to move again. It didn't. The TV kept playing behind me. The canned laughter felt wrong now, too loud and too cheerful. I muted it without looking away from the screen. Seconds passed. My thumb hovered over the option away from the screen. Seconds passed. My thumb hovered over the option to close the app, because the explanation was obvious. A bug, a delayed refresh. Nothing was actually there, because the explanation was obvious. A bug, a delayed refresh. Nothing was actually there. Then I noticed the sound. The live feed had audio, and someone was breathing. Not winged, not static. It was uneven, shallow, like someone trying to stay quiet but failing. I turned the volume up slowly, my heart beginning to thud harder with each notch. The breathing stopped. A moment later, the camera tilted, just slightly, downward, like it had been touched. My stomach dropped. The doorbell camera was fixed in place. It couldn't tilt. I knew that for a fact. I'd helped my dad install it. The only way the angle changed was if someone physically put their hand on it. I stared at the screen, my brain scrambling to rewrite what I was seeing to something else. A software hiccup, a corrupted frame, anything. Then a voice spoke, so close to the microphone that it distorted. Hello? Software hiccup, a corrupted frame, anything. Then a voice spoke, so close to the microphone that it distorted. Hello? It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It sounded almost casual, like someone testing whether a device worked. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The voice came again, quieter this time, like it was meant only for the camera. I know you're home. That was the moment everything collapsed. Not slowly, instantly. The noises from earlier, the loose chain, the muffled voice outside. My first instinct was to get up and run. That's what you imagine you'd do. Grab your phone, open the door, put distance between you and whatever is happening. But the second I shifted my weight forward, that instinct died. The second I shifted my weight forward, that instinct died. I realized I had nowhere to go. The front door was the only real exit. The back door led to the yard, which was fenced and dark, and the side gate was always locked at night. My parents had the key with them. Even if I went out back, I'd still have to circle the house to reach the street. Past the porch, past whoever was standing there. I stayed on the couch, my legs stiff, my feet flat on the floor, like if I moved them the wrong way something would hear. My phone buzzed again in my hand. The live feed was still running. The camera angle hadn't changed back. I locked my phone screen without thinking, then immediately regretted it. The silence felt worse without the feed, like I'd closed my phone screen without thinking, then immediately regretted it. The silence felt worse without the feed, like I'd closed my eyes instead of solving anything. I thought about calling someone. My parents were driving alone. No working phone, no adults, no clear proof of anything that would make sense to explain. Even if I wanted to leave, I didn't know how to do it safely. Even if I wanted help, I didn't know how to get it without making things worse. That was when it hit me, not as panic, but as a heavy sinking certainty. I was stuck, and whatever was outside knew that better than I did. I didn't decide to hide. My body did it before my thoughts caught up. I stood up slowly, every movement careful, like the air itself could give me away. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't look toward the front door. I moved away from it instead, toward the narrow space under the stairs where we kept coats, shoes, and things we didn't use often. It wasn't a good hiding place. It wasn't even meant for that. But it was out of direct sight, and it was closer than going upstairs. Going upstairs felt impossible. Too many open spaces. Going upstairs closer than going upstairs. Going upstairs felt impossible. Too many open spaces. Too many angles. I crouched down and pulled a jacket over my shoulders, more for cover than warmth. My knees pressed into the floor, and I shifted just enough to fit, then stopped moving entirely. I listened. At first, there was nothing. No footsteps, no knocking, no voice. The house felt hollow, like it was holding its breath with me. Time stretched in a way I still don't know how to explain. At first, there was nothing. No footsteps, no knocking, no voice. The house felt hollow, like it was holding its breath with me. Time stretched in a way I still don't know how to explain. Seconds felt thick, slow, like they had weight. I counted them without meaning to, then lost count and started over. Somewhere outside, something scraped softly against the porch. Not a sharp sound, more like fabric brushing concrete. It stopped, then started again, closer this time. I pressed my hand against my mouth because my breathing sounded too loud in my own ears. My heart was beating so hard I was sure it had to be visible, shaking my chest, my hand against my mouth because my breathing sounded too loud in my own ears. My heart was beating so hard I was sure it had to be visible, shaking my chest, giving me away. Footsteps, not heavy, not rushed. Slow, deliberate steps that moved across the porch and then stopped. Right in front of the door. I didn't move. I didn't think. I stayed exactly the way I was, frozen in a position that made my legs ache and my back burn. Pain felt safer than sound. The doorknob turned. Just once. Not aggressively, not testing the lock. More like someone checking calmly to confirm what they already knew. It returned to its original position with a quiet click. Silence again. I stared at the floor, at a dark spot in the wood I'd never noticed before, and focused on it like it was the only real thing left in the world. I told myself not to blink, not to shift, not to exist any more than I already was. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds. I couldn't tell. I heard breathing again. This time, it wasn't coming from my phone. It was on the other side of the door. Close enough that I could hear the faint hitch in it, like whoever it belonged to was listening just as carefully as I was. I understood then that this wasn't about breaking in quickly. It wasn't about force. It was about waiting. And all I could do was wait too. I don't know how long I stayed there before it happened. Long enough that my legs went numb. Long enough that the pain in my knees faded into something distant and unreal. I was still crouched under the stairs, barely breathing, listening so hard that every small sound felt magnified. The porch creaked again, this time. It wasn't subtle. It was the unmistakable sound of weight shifting, someone leaning closer to the door. I could picture it without trying to. The porch creaked again. This time, it wasn't subtle. It was the unmistakable sound of weight shifting, someone leaning closer to the door. I could picture it without trying, a body just inches from the wood, a head tilted slightly, listening for movement inside. Then the doorbell camera chimed. Not through my phone, through the small speaker mounted near the door itself. A soft electronic click, followed by a faint hum. Whoever was outside had pressed it. I felt something cold spread through my chest. The sound echoed through the house, loud in the silence, and then cut off abruptly. No recorded message played, just a confirmation tone. A second passed. Then a voice came through the speaker, distorted and flat from the device, but close enough that it felt like it was already inside. "You don't have to hide," it said. My stomach twisted. The words weren't threatening. They weren't angry. They were calm, almost patient, like someone talking to a child who thought they were playing a game. I squeezed my eyes shut. The voice continued, quieter now. "I saw your light earlier. My heart slammed so hard I thought it would betray me. I remembered the kitchen light I'd left on, the way it had spilled into the living room. How normal the kitchen light I'd left on, the way it had spilled into the living room. How normal it had felt." A pause. Footsteps again. This time moving away from the door, then stopping. I imagined the person repositioning, finding a better angle, deciding what to do next. Something brushed against the front of the house. Fingers, maybe, or a sleeve. I couldn't tell. I didn't want a sound that pushed everything to the edge. Keys. Not brushed against the front of the house. Fingers, maybe, or a sleeve. I couldn't tell. I didn't want to. Then came the sound that pushed everything to the edge. Keys. Not rattling wildly. Not dropped. Just a quiet, deliberate jingle of metal being sorted through. One key scraping lightly against another as it was tested. The doorknob turned again. Slowly. It didn't open. The deadbolt held. But the pressure stayed there, steady, like whoever was holding it expected it to give if they were patient enough. My entire body locked. But the pressure stayed there, steady, like whoever was holding it expected it to give if they were patient enough. My entire body locked. I couldn't move even if I wanted to. My mind narrowed to one single thought, repeating over and over. If it opens, there's nothing I can do. The handle released. Footsteps retreated one step, then another, and then I heard the voice again, right outside the door. "Okay," it said softly. "We'll wait." That was when I understood how close it had been, and how close it still was. It didn't end because I did something right. I didn't scare him off. I didn't outsmart anyone. I stayed exactly where I was, shaking under the stairs, waiting for something irreversible to happen. What broke the moment was sound. Not from inside the house, from the street. Headlights swept briefly across the living room wall as a car turned the corner too fast. Tires hissed on wet asphalt. An engine revved, then slowed, then stopped somewhere nearby. Across the living room wall as a car turned the corner too fast. Tires hissed on wet asphalt. An engine revved, then slowed, then stopped somewhere nearby. A car door slammed. Another voice carried faintly through the night. Male, loud, distracted, talking to someone else. The pressure at the front of the house vanished. I didn't hear footsteps leave the porch. I didn't hear the gate open or close. There was no clear moment where I could say he was gone. Just the sudden absence of presence, like a weight lifted without warning. I stayed frozen. Minutes passed. I didn't move when the street went quiet again. I didn't move when the house settled back into its normal sounds. I didn't move when my leg started to ache sharply and my foot fell asleep completely. Eventually, I realized I was listening for something specific and not hearing it anymore. Breathing. The faint sound on the other side of the door was gone. I waited longer than made sense. Long enough that the fear changed shape and became something dull and heavy instead of sharp. When I finally shifted, it was only because my muscles betrayed me and my knee cracked softly under the strain. When I finally shifted, it was only because my muscles betrayed me and my knee cracked softly under the strain. The sound felt impossibly loud. Nothing answered it. I didn't go to the door. I didn't look outside. I stayed where I was, pressed into the shadow under the stairs, staring at nothing, trying to convince myself that silence meant safety. It didn't feel like relief. It felt unfinished. Whatever had been outside hadn't been chased away. It hadn't lost interest. It had simply stopped, the way someone stops mid-thought when they're interrupted. I understood when I stirred in one darst interest. It had simply stopped, the way someone stops mid-thought when they're interrupted. I understood that clearly. Had interest. It had simply stopped, the way someone stops mid-thought when they're interrupted. I understood that clearly. The night hadn't resolved itself. It had paused, and I was still inside it.
The front door opened just after 2 o'clock a.m. I knew the sound instantly. My parents' keys. The familiar rhythm of them moving through the lock. I didn't come out right away. I stayed under the stairs, listening to them step inside, hearing my mom ask quietly if I was asleep. My dad noticed the lights first. The TV still on. The stairs, listening to them step inside, hearing my mom ask quietly if I was asleep. My dad noticed the lights first. The TV still on. The house too quiet. They found me sitting on the floor, wrapped in a jacket that wasn't mine, shaking so hard I couldn't stand on my own. I tried to explain, but the words came out wrong. Disconnected. I kept starting sentences and stopping halfway through. My dad checked the door. The locks, the camera. That's when his face changed. The doorbell camera hadn't just activated once. There were multiple live view attempts recorded in the system log. No video. No image. Just timestamp seams. The doorbell camera hadn't just activated once. There were multiple live view attempts recorded in the system log. No video. No image. Just timestamps showing someone had connected and disconnected repeatedly over nearly an hour. The camera housing was loose. Not broken. Not damaged.
Just slightly shifted, like it had been handled carefully. My mom called the police. They arrived quickly, but there was nothing for them to see. No footprints. No damage. No person matching a description I couldn't even give properly. They walked the perimeter with flashlights and asked questions that felt too clean for what had happened. One of them suggested it could have been someone checking houses. Another said maybe the camera malfunctioned and scared me. They wrote things down, nodded, and eventually left. The next down, nodded, and eventually left. The next day, my dad rewatched the logs again. There was one final connection attempt logged at 2:03 a.m. 3 minutes after my parents' attempt logged at 2:03 a.m. 3 minutes after my parents' car turned onto the street. That was when it sank in. Whoever it was had been watching. Waiting. 3 minutes after my parents' car turned onto the street. That was when it sank in. Whoever it was had been watching. Waiting. And it only left because someone else arrived. It wasn't imagined. It wasn't exaggeration. It wasn't nothing. It was worse than I thought. Hauters had been searching me. Hon je lift. The Rache. What was some scrunfurf and verserived. It wasn't imagined. It wasn't exaggeration. It wasn't nothing. It was worse than I thought. I'm older now, but nothing about that night ever really stayed in the past. What still bothers me isn't the voice, or the door, or even the camera. It's the timing. The way everything stopped only when someone else arrived. The way it ended without ending. Sometimes when I'm home alone, I catch myself checking reflections in dark windows, not to see who's there, but to make sure no one is standing just out of sight. I don't leave lights on anymore. I don't trust silence the way I used to. I think about how long he was outside, how early it started, how patient he was, and I think about one simple thing I never told the police because I didn't realize it mattered until later. The voice never asked me to open the door. It already knew I wouldn't. That's what stays with me. I survived. But whatever waited that night never really left.